So it's not an attack on the verse, but to invoke that verse in the middle of a hot war and respond to it by saying, this is what we're doing today. Amalek is Iran, is to call for genocide against your opponent. Now, without even judging that, it's worth noting that is not in the interest of the United States. Despite what the president said today about eliminating the country with nuclear weapons, that is not in the interest of the United States. It's not the desire of the American people to commit genocide against the Iranians. Without even considering what the downstream effects of that might be, profound, without even considering that, ask yourself, is that why we're in this war? Because we think the Iranians are Amalek? They seem kind of awful and scary and they're like bad Islamic people or whatever. But are we really going to try to eliminate every one of them? The men, the women, the children, the infants, the camels and the sheep? Nah, that's not in our purview because it's not in our interest because, first of all, we don't do things like that and never should. And second, how does that make us stronger and richer and more secure? I don't think it does. Israel has a different view. And so that's the point. This can never work in America's national interest as long as it is tethered to another country's national interest. And if that doesn't work, if it doesn't work in the middle of a war, it probably doesn't work in peacetime either. It probably doesn't work to have a permanent Israeli detachment at, say, the Pentagon, where our wars are planned, or at CIA, where information is collated and analyzed. It probably doesn't work to have people in all branches of government who are dual citizens with Israel and other countries. What? Because you're always going to wind up where we are now, which is tethered to another country, which may be a good country or a bad country. We can debate that. But it's not America. And the purpose of the American government is to serve the American people. Not in some abstract way in their war against radical Islam, but in a concrete way, like nicer airports and no crime and decent schools. The things that any citizen should expect from his government. And if you're totally ignoring all of those on behalf of another country, it's just not acceptable. And it's also not sustainable. And so no matter where this goes, and again, we pray it is resolved peacefully and soon, our country needs to think through how this happened, find out in specific terms, not bury it like 9/11 and every other traumatic event over the last 50 years or 63 years. It's like, oh, we're not really sure. We need to be sure. How did this happen? How can we prevent it from happening again? A sober assessment of what went wrong. That's what all functional institutions do. They used to be called after-action reports, and they were mandatory so it didn't happen again. That's what the NTSB does with plane crashes. How'd this happen? We're not going to guess. We're not going to blame radical Islam. We're going to find out whether the pedo tubes worked. We're going to find out the specifics that led to this tragedy, because we don't want more tragedies. And if we'd done that after the Iraq War, we probably wouldn't be here. Because the Iraq War was started, which, as everyone knows, went on for 20 years at great cost, trillions of dollars, and the deaths of hundreds of thousands, millions of people, all in, was started under very similar circumstances. Pressure from Israel, bad intelligence, in part, not exclusively, but in part from Israel, a massive lobbying campaign by Israel-aligned pundits and think tank people, politicians. And if it had gone well, okay. But it didn't. And no one was ever punished for it. And more critically, no one ever explained precisely what happened. And 23 years later, that was 23 years ago this month, we're still debating why it happened. And there are increasingly few people who were there and remember. I'm one of them. Let's not let that happen this time. We can't afford more wars like this. Literally can't afford it, and we shouldn't have to. Because the purpose of the U.S. government is to serve Americans, period. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, an honest man, Dr. Bret Weinstein. Bret, thank you for doing this. I'm always grateful to see you in person.
Glad to be here.
This is one of those moments, it's hard to understand what's happening. But here's what I believe to be true. The president had deep reservations about doing this. He promised repeatedly as he campaigned for this job that he wouldn't do this war with Iran. He made fun of people who suggested he do it. I don't think many of his actual employed advisors were eager to do this. That's my impression, based on the reporting. And the only people who wanted to do it were a group of informal advisors on the outside who were calling in, you got to do it. Mark Thiessen of the Washington Post and other people whose opinions hard to imagine taking seriously. But whatever, they wanted it, and Benjamin Netanyahu wanted it. The country did not want it at all, as expressed in polling, but we did it anyway, and it's turned out to be, I think it will turn out to be, unfortunately, a kind of a pivot in our history. Why did we do this? What was the point? Do you have any sense?
Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question, and I will say I find Trump himself a fascinating and mysterious character. He's highly unusual, and therefore it's a little hard to understand.
Do you find him more mysterious now than you did 10 years ago when you first started watching, when we all first started watching?
Well, I understand him a lot better than I did because, of course, I now have so much evidence of how he behaves under different circumstances, for both better and worse. But in thinking about this move, it seems like such an obvious mistake, both from the point of view of the nation and the danger of a quagmire, which I think is substantial, and the danger of a terrible outcome, which I think will likely be avoided, but I do worry about the role that nuclear weapons could play here. But the thing that really causes me to think there's something I can't see is that the mistake that Trump has made here is a political mistake. If you picked one realm where I would expect Trump not to make an obvious mistake, it would be the political. I literally think we are dealing with a political genius, right? If nothing else, this person has understood the way he is viewed, the American electorate, such that he could be relied upon not to make a blunder of this scale, especially as his presidency hangs in the balance, which it clearly does, because if the Democrats take the Senate in addition to the House, then not only will he be impeached, which I think is highly likely with the House alone, but he will be convicted, and that will be the end of his presidency. It will also be his legacy. So, why would a man who understands politics better than any of us, a guy who did what I would have told you was impossible, he beat the duopoly, both sides of it, took over the Republican Party, defeated the Democratic Party soundly. That is a person with insight, making a move that seems like a childish blunder. And it leaves me with a very unsettling hypothesis. I don't have high confidence in it, but my concern is that this is evidence that he is not in control. He is not in control as commander-in-chief of his own armed forces, and that he is, in fact, having to rationalize decisions that he would not have made and promised not to make on the campaign trail. And I don't quite know what to do with that. It's a very unsettling thought, but I don't see the win here, and I don't see a win in a short enough time period that this could put him ahead in the midterms. It's very hard for me to imagine that.
Well, I think that's the least bad outcome from the perspective of the Trump administration. If Republicans get stomped in the midterms, but then somehow recover a workable majority of voters, I think they'll be thrilled. But I think the potential consequences, unless the party is to find a leader who represents its voters, because it's really that simple over time. Are you addressing the concerns of your voters? If so, you probably get elected, and if you're not, you probably won't. I think it's like, Gavin Newsom's going to be president if this continues on its current course. So the question is, what do you need to restore, actually? Leaving aside how do you get out of the war, which I think is very complicated, but how do you restore confidence in the government after the government just admitted they got Americans killed on behalf of another country, which is what they've admitted and what they did.
Well, I mean, I will tell you, I don't think I was naive going into the last election. I have long viewed the duopoly as unbeatable and Trump as capable of a political feat in that realm that others weren't. But in terms of how compromised our governmental structures are by corruption, there was always the question as to whether or not there was enough power left in American elections to actually change our trajectory as a country. And in the aftermath of the attack on Iran, I'm shaken. I don't know. I think the answer I just got is it didn't matter who you voted for. The neocons had moved over to the Democratic Party. I think Iran, we know it was on their agenda for decades. I think an attack on Iran was coming, and I tweeted before this happened, we're going to attack Iran and we're not going to be given a choice about it. And that feels like what has occurred. But I do want to say the hypothesis that the president is not in control is one of two. The alternative hypothesis, as far as I can see it, is that he is being shown a very compelling false rendition of the world that has led him to act in a way that would be politically advantageous and would be in the interests of the nation if what he was seeing was true, but that it isn't. Now, that's also a very unsettling possibility, that he is surrounded by people who are wittingly or not showing him a picture that is unrealistic so that he would, in fact, put our military in harm's way and destabilize Iran, not understanding what the likely consequences were.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. And the people who are calling to influence him, are unwise but also ignorant and have a track record of bad calls and but possess maximum aggression. So there's no question that his fact picture was totally distorted. And it still is. I mean, the overwhelming majority of Iranian signal information, signal intelligence that we receive has been translated by Israel. So, okay, it's been filtered, and maybe honestly, maybe not. But yeah, he's not seeing the whole picture. Of course, no president does. But he's also, as you just suggested at the outset, which is the most interesting thing, he overrode his own instincts. He has amazing political instincts. People zig, he zags, he turns out to be right. He attacked the Iraq War when that was totally verboten in the Republican Party in the primaries in 2016, and it turned out to be the most resonant thing. Yes, finally someone's saying it. Only he knew that. Only he understood that. So his instincts are like at the highest level, and he ignored them. So why?
Well, I think we need to know the answer to that question. And I think we Americans have to have a conversation with ourselves about not only how broken our system is and what it is resulting in us doing, but how does it actually work? What is it that is actually driving us to do what we do? And, we can see parts of it. We can see lobbying, for example. It's the loophole in our system where the system is pay for play. That is used day in and day out by corporations to get us to do things that are bad for our health, bad for our long-term financial well-being, bad in every regard. But obviously, our adversaries abroad will have noticed that we have a pay-for-play system, and if they aren't taking advantage of it, that would be surprising. I would like to know why they would have missed the opportunity, so presumably they are. And that also applies to our allies, unfortunately. That is to say, anytime somebody has an interest that is in conflict with the interests that we Americans actually have, they are in a position to nudge us in their direction, and we are undoubtedly being nudged. On the other hand, I don't think that can be the sum total of it. And I will tell you, I don't like saying any of this. I don't want to be doing this. But
tell me about it.
The reason that the Epstein phenomenon, whatever it was, is so important is that it suggests a hidden power structure that was there for leverage. It is unfortunate that in the edit that we have been shown, we don't have conclusive evidence of who, what they were after, or even how the leverage worked. All we can see is strong evidence that there was something. Logically, it is implied that it was connected to intelligence services, ours, likely Israel's, who knows who else. But when you see your government, your president, functioning in ways that do not add up, it's like watching a planet behave oddly because of the gravity of some object you haven't found yet, right? There's the implication that there's something with power in this system that is undeclared. As far as we know, it's unnamed. And the central question is, what is it? How does it work? And how much effect is it having on what we do? And I tried in my own way to raise this issue publicly. I believe we are in the midst not only of a constitutional crisis, which arguably has been ongoing since 2001, maybe much longer, maybe 1963.
Around November 22nd, in that range? Of 1963?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the question: was that a lone gun nut or was that a coup? And if it was a coup, did the thing that took power ever relinquish it? I don't know the answer to that question.
I'll just put it this way: if the U.S. government ever goes bankrupt, and disability payments stop, Social Security payments stop, all payments stop, medical research, the CIA will still be well funded.
Well, the CIA, I used to say black budget, because obviously there are black budgets. But then I realized I was using the wrong term. A black budget is a budget that is opaque to the outside world, but it still comes from somewhere. The real problem is the ability to fund your own agency.
Of course.
And if you have superior information about the world, you know what's going to happen because you're in part responsible or you're listening into things that are responsible, then you are in a perfect position to